Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another in our series of virtual events following on from Black Lives Matter last year. In our first series of events in 2020, we spoke to lawyers and experts about the measures that law firms could take to increase diversity in senior leadership positions. And this year, we're speaking to law firms about what's worked and what actions and measures are really making a difference. So focusing a lot on outcomes. And today, I'm delighted to say we're talking to three leaders about how their role as a senior ally on diversity has made that difference. So a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, just to remind those of you who are watching that you can ask questions, but you need to use the facility underneath the webinar to type in those questions. They'll come through to me so that we can get some answers for you, but please do take advantage of that. So why is the role of a senior ally so important? Well, I guess I'd start by saying that my view, and there's a real sense in which I think this absolutely applies to me as well, is that allies play a really significant role in creating the environment, an inclusive environment where everyone can thrive. Whether we're on the board or on the executive team, we set the tone, I think, for the way that organisations that we're involved with approach EDI. We keep it, I hope, on the corporate and board agenda. We ask the right questions, are suitably challenging if we think that the right steps aren't being taken, and we explore the data that is put in front of us to understand what's really happening. And I truly believe that senior allies can, as a result of that, have a very direct impact on the success of EDI in their organisations. So I guess that is to say that good leadership really matters. Easier said than done, though, because when you look at the picture that the current numbers paint, we know that all is not as well as we would like it to be in this space. So the largest firms, so firms with 50 plus partners, have the lowest proportion of BAME partners, only 8%. And that contrasts really strongly with one partner firms where 36% of the partners are from a BAME background. And it's also notable that the larger firms have the highest proportion of lawyers that attended private schools. So there are issues here around ethnicity, issues around social mobility, all of which we clearly need to grapple with. So today, as I said, we're talking to a panel of large firm senior allies on how they're making a difference. And I'm delighted to introduce Michael Davison, Deputy CEO at Hogan Lovells, Hamid Yunus, partner at McDermott, Will and Emery, and then also Helen Randall, partner at Trowers and Hamlins. And I'm going to invite them in that order to speak to us for 5 minutes or so about the work that they've been doing and the outcomes that it has delivered, and then we'll move to some questions. So perhaps I could start with you first, please, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for hosting this on this very important topic. So, as Anna explained, my name is Michael Davison, and I'm the Deputy CEO of Hogan Lovells. So in that role, I'm responsible for the day-to-day management of a lot of the operations of the firm. It's a firm that has over 46 offices, 8,000 employees, so it's a large business. But this is one of the most important aspects that that I have been charged with by our CEO. And I think that the thing how I approach it very much is to make sure that what we do as a firm is actually meaningful, that it actually sort of delivers results. And that means it has to resonate with people very much as on a local level. So what we have very much done as a firm is try to create networks in each of our communities which resonates with the diverse populations in our firm, and listen to them very actively to make sure that that matches their needs, and provides for them, very importantly, a forum for them to talk openly about the issues that they face in the firm, and what they want the firm to actually do. So, for instance, after the killing and murder of George Floyd, we had several of these forums around the firm where we actually came together as a community, talked about how those issues were working out for us in our firm, and listened to our people to actually hear what they want us to do and to say as a firm in relation to that. So I'm, for instance, the executive sponsor of the Race and Ethnicity Network here in London, which is actually one of the most important things I think I do, and I very much enjoy it. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'll come to some questions in a minute, but perhaps I can ask you, Hamid, to go next.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for the invitation to take part in this forum, which I think is an extremely important initiative for all of us, really. Just introduce myself, first of all. My name is Hamid Yunus. I'm the managing partner in London of McDermott, Will & Emery. We are a large international global law firm. A substantial proportion of our firm is based in the US, but we do have offices around the world as well. Therefore, diversity and inclusion and creating opportunity for people to join our firm is very real. And I think the point you made right at the beginning about senior allies, I think, as Michael was saying, right from the top of our firm, we have Ira Coleman, who's our chairman, and everything really is based around Ira making this. You've heard the expression about it being part of our DNA. Well, it truly is. I mean, I've been amazed in a sense as to how it pervades almost everything we do, from recruitment, from our business development, from our pitching for work, from how we treat our own people, how we create opportunities for people. So I think that creation of equality, diversity, inclusion is just part of our firm. I mean, I was very proud to be part of the firm where after Michael mentioned it as well, the killing of George Floyd, there was a lot of activity where there was real practical things that we did to make sure that we could have initiatives in the firm that could portray what we all felt about the disgust and disillusionment of what was happening in the US, and that has happened around the world. But I was very proud in particular that we had some of our African American colleagues, actually Afro-Caribbean colleagues as well from London, who presented some of their stories, unconscious bias, or instances where they'd gone into shops and the shopkeeper was, tracking them, even though, they hadn't done anything, they weren't intending to do anything, but they would suffer in this prejudice. And we had a Zoom call, and I think I'm right in saying it was the biggest attendance that we had on any Zoom call within the firm. There were over 1,000 people who took part on that. So that's for a lot of what we're doing, that's amongst the world records of, within our firm of the number of people taking part. So I think this whole subject, it is a massive subject that we've got to get right for everything we're doing and how we're facing the future. And I'm pleased to say, we have and we can talk about that later on, some of the practical measures and initiatives that we have that allow us to create those opportunities that I talked about.
Thanks very much, Hamid. And Helen.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for asking me to join you today. I'm Helen Randall. I'm a partner, and I'm also head and champion of our Diversity, Inclusion and Equality initiative at Trowers and Hamlins, which we call Trowers Includes, which is very much led by listening to our people. We have a number of networks, have had for some time, and I'm really pleased that we have very senior commitment from our senior and managing partners downwards, but also I would say upward and laterally in the firm. And we were very conscious with the killing of George Floyd over the summer that this was during the pandemic, and there wasn't the sort of, you couldn't have those natural water cooler conversations that colleagues tend to have, when the office is up and running in a normal way. So what we felt, first of all, was the most important thing was really to listen. In particular to our Black colleagues, and how they felt about things, what they wanted to say, and I felt very much my role, but others' roles as well, of other partners, was to amplify their voices. So that set and train a dialogue, which I think started from the place was really that a commitment to anti-racism is really intrinsic to being a solicitor, because of course we mustn't forget our code of conduct has a requirement to be aware of diversity, and actually this might have crystallized issues, but they're issues that have been there for a very long time, and racism has been there for a very long time. And as we all know, the problem is not really so much people saying things that are explicit, but things that might be implicit. And we're very conscious of that. So we started last year with data and with quite forensic data analysis, going back 5 years, to inform a race action plan. And I can talk more about that later. And we signed up to the race fairness commitment. But internally, we did other things as well. So we had various debates, and one of the things we did was a lot of us wanted to educate ourselves. So, we had some sort of book club sessions, talking about these books, which are great books, because we think it's incumbent really on white colleagues to educate themselves and to listen and amplify, as I've said, but also to facilitate, which involved not just Zoom sessions, but also we had some podcasts. The head of our Birmingham office, Yetunde Denier, and another partner in our Birmingham office, Amadeep Gill, did a podcast within a couple of days, talking about how they felt, what their personal experiences were. But also, as a law firm, of course, you don't exist without your clients. And we were conscious that this is a really important issue for our clients as well. So we engaged, for example, one of our clients, Southwark Council, was reaching out to their Black and minority ethnic communities in an initiative they called Southwark Stands Together. So we collaborated with them in a podcast. And that's led us into a whole program, really, of looking more forensically about what we have done in the past and being more rigorous and covering, sort of complete cradle to grave. So ranging from being better at doing outreach before people even think of contemplating a year in the law. We've always had outreach programs, right the way through to graduate recruitment, lateral hires, what we ask of our recruitment agencies, looking at contextual recruitment, the life cycle. We ask specifically in exit interviews as well about racism and microaggressions, through to sort of more positive things, which are celebrations of diversity. So things like Black History Month, basically having employees and staff designing what they want to do in terms of celebrating Black history. So a kind of whole range of areas, really.
That's fantastic. Thank you all, and we'll pick up lots of those points as you've said going through. But I wondered if I could start by asking you some questions, sort of specifically around what you've said, and I wonder, Michael, if you talked about sponsoring the networks, and I, this is something that certainly we've talked about at the SRA board. So we have board sponsors, but I wondered if you could you could elaborate. What does it mean to sponsor a network? How do you give that life and use it as an ally to good effect in an organisation?
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the aspects of my job that I get most satisfaction out of, actually. And I think the first thing about the sponsor is that you have to listen to what the group wants to do. And then, to be frank, because of the positions we occupy in our respective firms, we can then make it happen. Okay, so simple things about getting big organizations to shift, to actually allow people to host events, even now on Zoom, but to do things that just to get it done, basically, and to get it done quickly and in a way which is then meaningful for people. So there was a big, I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a view that came up that, some parts of our firm, despite all the training that we give and all the stuff that we put out, still thought, how do you actually become a partner really in this firm? And what challenges do we as part of this firm have in making that journey? So we got a whole panel of partners together. We just called it Demystifying the Route to Partnership. And it was great, because usually that's the kind of thing that perhaps people come to at different times. We had trainees, we had the whole sort of the whole range of our people there, grilling partners, and quite senior partners at that, on how to do it. And because I think I was there, that we got real engagement around it. I think too that you can then do all sorts of, we've got a reciprocal mentoring program now. So how do you get people to do that? We've had champions that go out and actually take it into the teams and say, look, this really matters how we act as a team. This is the kind of thing that you need to be able to do. And then, candidly, we had to hold up a lens to ourselves, and we had, as Hamid was saying, that following the George Floyd, people coming to us with their stories of how they were experiencing this, and providing them with an opportunity to explain. And that was sometimes people telling their own stories, but what we found particularly powerful was people who felt very uncomfortable about sharing that level of personal detail. We got the CEO of the firm to read some of them out, and that, and Miguel Salvador did that, and that was incredibly powerful, because here was the story of day-to-day existence for some members of our firm, and it really, really came to life. So you can do this in many different ways, but I think my role is not to be the leader of the conversation. Mine is to implement what the network wants us to do. So I hope that helps explain how I approach that role. But.
Yeah, so I mean, in a way that gives a really simple message. The role is to listen and make it happen, and it could be as simple as that. And you're of course quite right that the more senior you are, that the more you can get an organisation to jump over hurdles and remove obstacles and make things happen. We all know that's more possible than not, actually. So perhaps moving on to Hamid, I just wonder, Hamid, how that plays in the global context that you were describing. Is it the same? Is it different? Thinking about sort of how other global firms might respond.
I think, Anna, just looking at that question, I think it's a case of learning from what other people are doing, be they law firms or other institutions. And I think the financial institutions, the other professional services firms, we're not the kind of firm that if other people are perhaps doing things that we could do better, we can't learn from. We will learn from them. And I think, again, what Michael was saying is we also look at ourselves as well to to try and learn those lessons and actually remain. And we'd like to think we are, but it's an ongoing process to remain amongst the firms that are leaders in this area of creating equality, diversity, and inclusion for everyone. I think the point of seeing what's happening globally is an important point. So let me go back to that example of what happened in the US last year. That sort of awareness movement started in the US, but actually a little bit before that, we had a very strong functioning diversity and inclusion group that was primarily led from the US. And a lot of it was about creating opportunities for African Americans. Mm-hmm. Right? On the other aspects of equality, such as disability or gender equality, and its various different formats, we were doing a fair bit, but a lot of it was around race. Now, in London, we also had people who were interested in trying to create the circumstances that was right for our London firm, because some of the issues we face are exactly the same, but some of them are specific to our UK market, our European market. So what we did was we created, prior to what happened last year in the US, we created a group that tried to organise our activities aligned with our wider message as a firm as a whole, and we contribute to that as well, but also to adapt it to our local market as well. So if in percentage terms, it could be something like 70% is our global DNA, our global messages, 30% would be more appropriate. And that sort of manifests itself in terms of, some of the practical measures, some of the programs we sponsor, some of the joint ventures or alignments, partnerships that we have on the ground, some of the charities we support locally. So I think the simple answer is, look, keep your eyes and ears open. If there are things that we can do better, we're willing to learn from those experiences. We think we are doing a relatively good job, but it's a continuing process, and we can do more, and we are doing more. And it's a continuing process.
Thanks, Hamid. I mean, Helen, you talked a lot about amplifying voices.
Yes,
which is a different dimension of facilitate and make it happen. It's slightly different thing. Can you talk a bit about that and the way you use stories in that environment?
Yes. So I think I've always thought it's very important to listen to people, but before you can listen to people, you have to. And it's difficult, I think, as a senior person in a firm, is you have to indicate that you're a person that's ready to listen, and you have to be approachable, because nobody's going to come and tell you anything. If they're frightened, they're going to lose their job. And you can only do that really by contacting people, by getting in touch, proactively reaching out to people, frankly. And that involves, talking to people, starting the dialogue with, the person in the post room, or the person in HR, or, the junior paralegal in one of the regional offices, and listening to what their experience is. And then giving them the forum to express it. And as I think as already been said, that some people don't feel confident about having necessarily bearing their soul to the world. So sometimes it might involve someone who is in a position of relative privilege and safety voicing some of those things. Just to give some practical examples, really, there are, I think, it can involve maybe, we've talked about mentoring, but it could be maybe mentoring partners who are from a BAME background. it could be partners who are people who are already partners of the BAME background, putting them in touch with other people, giving them a platform and an opportunity to talk about things. It could be listening to maybe the person, Black and minority ethnic people who are working in HR, in support departments, and facilitating them to express themselves. Because I think as law firms, I don't think any of the people here on this call would be in any way guilty of this, but as law firms, it's really important that we listen to our voices who aren't fee earners, because no law firm can actually, we're all big organisms. We're like big ecosystems, really, and none of us can do our job without everybody. And we have to value everybody. So you have to look quite forensically. And if you're thinking, there is a voice of a department I'm not hearing, why is it we're not hearing that? And lawyers, let's face it, as part of their training, we're very much encouraged, aren't we, to speak up and be advocates for ourselves and other people, but maybe not so much in support departments. So looking at that practically, I think it's about giving them a forum. So it might be saying, would you be willing to chair the book club where we're discussing this particular book? Or would you be willing to participate in a podcast? Or would you be willing to provide your story? Or when we were formulating the firm's statement about Black Lives Matters, we very much didn't want to just put out a statement that was empty virtue signaling. So getting those people involved in writing the statement and being informed by their actual lived experience, rather than writing a statement and then it being reviewed. It's much better if they actually initiate things, and you help facilitate that.
Thanks very much. So you talked about reaching out to those particular groups, making it known that you want to listen, you're ready to hear, and trying to make it inclusive. But it strikes me that actually you can't just do that around issues of EDI. That actually people will only believe you if that's the way you are. As a matter of course, and in respect of everything you do in the firm, and that that kind of takes you straight to organisational culture overall, rather than the specific of this set of issues. And I know, Michael, that's something that you're particularly interested in, the overall culture that creates. But how do you measure a good culture in this respect? How do you create it?
Well, we spend a lot of time talking about our culture and what it means to work at our firm and to be part of our firm. I think Helen was spot on that you have to make sure that it's the whole of the community that feels engaged in this, and that has to definitely determine how you approach each of these topics. And so that's why we make sure that we try and cover the whole of the community by having champions there who are really engaged. So we can sit in our room and talk about our thing, but we need to get it out into the population in a way which then they feel they can feed back into us. So some of the most senior people on our network, are in the business services functions, and actually quite junior levels within those functions, but they have quite a senior position on our network. So we try and do it that way. So we talk about our culture a lot, and we define it in lots of different ways. But I sort of turn it around, taking the appropriate steps here enables us to. So there's a lot of that. We can talk about being ambitious and innovative, but we also talk about being committed, supportive, and inclusive. So it's being inclusive, so everyone's part of the firm, but being supportive of each other during the times, and being sensitive to how events are playing out differently. So the pandemic has affected certain parts of our community in a fundamentally different way to others. So how do we as an organization make sure that when we're talking about, for instance, our return to work policy, we are, how are we going to come back to work, and do we want to come back to work, and what form are we going to come back to work? That being part of our supportive culture is addressing the needs of our whole community, and I think that really sort of matters. So it's like a sort of chemical reaction, and you have to keep making sure that the culture is being fed and nurtured in a way which is as inclusive as it possibly can be. And I think, to come back to our race and ethnicity work, we call it REAL, race and ethnicity at Hogan Lovells, and that is our mechanism for making sure that when we're talking about these issues as a firm, we can reflect back what every part of our firm is thinking about these very different issues. I think the stresses and strains being put on all different parts of our communities, but as a result of COVID, is something that we really, as organisations, need to reflect on and make sure that we address appropriately. I don't know if the others on the panel agree with that, but I certainly feel very strongly about that.
No, if I may, Anna, I totally agree with everything what Helen and Michael have said. I mean, without going through saying the same thing again, in a sense. I mean, I think they're tremendously important points. I mean, examples that we can give as to, and Anna, your point about it's not just specific questions that we need to create an inclusive environment, on race or inequality. People have to feel confident that the firm will listen to them about other things as well. So I mean, two examples I would give is, I think it's true throughout our offices. It's also true as a macro message from the firm that we have regular meetings within cohorts, and also between cohorts, if I can call it that, to make sure that these issues are tabled, any concerns that people may have are tabled. So it is not a surprise if somebody is raising something. Of course, people are people, and if somebody is relatively junior, they might feel they can't raise something with somebody who they perceive to be much more senior to them. But we do try to create a mentor system where they can, where they can articulate those issues, concerns if they want. I think the other example I would give is just putting it's not your money where your mouth is, our ideals where your mouth is. I sat through a global management meeting last year where the head of our diversity and inclusion globally is on that management committee, is on the very senior, and there's others as well from a diverse background, such as myself, who are on that as well. But he was on that committee and is quite vocal in terms of where we are not, for instance, considering a diversity element to an initiative we have on. And it quite quickly we pivot to make sure that particular element is taken into account in the actions that we're taking. In this case, it was opening up a new office. We needed to take on into account the makeup of that city, the diverse nature of the partners that might be in a particular office. And I was very proud, again, of that being raised. So it goes to that point about culture. Is it an open culture? And you've got to also, and I use this phrase quite often, make positive interventions to perhaps continue that culture, but make sure that you have one. So one last point I make about the return to the office. I feel, I mean, I've got a daughter who's 21 and is spending a year with a law firm at the moment, but she's only been in twice, and then goes back to university. So, and an awful law firm it is. So that's the competitive element of us all coming out. No, they're a fantastic law firm, but I just wish she'd been in there and spent some time with the lawyers and so on. But people of that age and people coming into the profession for the first time, or our young lawyers, let alone the partners, isn't it a big shame that they can't go in and learn from people and have the water cooler moment that we were all brought up with. And, so we're making positive interventions to allow that to happen, subject to the rules of a local jurisdiction. So, and I think it's very important for leadership, the senior allies, to make sure that happens. Otherwise, we'll have a generation of people who are going to miss out on a lot of experiences that we had.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think it's something we're all very, very mindful of. So we've had a question in from someone who's watching, which drives me to the point of talking about actions and outcomes. We said we'd focus on actions and outcomes. So someone said, with no accusation of in relation to any of you or specific firms, but just can we talk a bit about tokenism? That it's the first step on the path is absolutely to find ways to encourage people to talk and to listen and for people to feel that you really have heard what they have to say about the situation. But I think, as you said at the outset, Michael, it's what counts is whether something is then done. And I wondered if I could invite each of you, and I'll start with you, Helen, if that's okay, to talk about something that has an outcome that has been delivered of which you're proud, and then backtrack to what it was you did to achieve it, rather than start with the process.
Well, I think an outcome of which I'm proud is that we now have. We now definitely have a more diverse intake of trainees than we had probably, say 10 years ago. And that has been, we were a founder member of an organisation called Aspiring Solicitors, who are, great at expanding diversity. So I feel proud about that. And I also feel proud about the solicitors who are now in our firm, who are advocates for aspiring solicitors and who mentor people who want to come into the profession, who have, who suffer from various different kinds of disadvantage, or who wouldn't in the old days have had an opportunity because they just wouldn't have had networks. And so I feel very proud that, looking round at our more junior lawyers and our trainees, we definitely have a more diverse intake. And I feel very proud of the fact that they are mentoring other people to come into the profession, and they're engaged in outreach. And I suppose I also feel very proud that I feel very proud of some of my Black colleagues who are really acting as role models for other people. So I particularly call out Yetunde Denia, who is the partner who heads up our Birmingham office, and Teresa Mohammed, who is a construction litigation partner, who are really making a difference, I think, in terms of seeing through with us how our race and action plan will change people who are coming into not just people who are coming into Trowers and Hamlins, but also I think the legal community, and also just putting a legal career on the map for people who otherwise just wouldn't have contemplated it, would have thought it's not for me. So that's what I feel proud of, I suppose.
So I'm going to put you slightly more on the spot, Helen. Thanks for that. Looking at one of those three things of which you feel particularly proud, can you kind of illustrate what the role of a senior ally or senior allies might have been in that achievement?
So I think the role of a senior ally, I think first of all, I go back to, my thing about it's about listening, self-educating and amplifying and facilitating. So in terms of, first of all, it's looking at your data. And I think if you carry out an in-depth data analysis, it tells you a lot about who the underrepresented people are in your firm. I think you can then look at how you address that, which is, through, as people have said earlier, it's basically, it has to be an intrinsic part of every single decision you make as a business. And then as an ally, getting that into all the fora which are part of the firm's management. So that will be getting that into deliberations of the firm's management board. I was on, and my successor will be on our partnership promotion panel. So we always have regard to diversity, inclusion, and equality when we are taking people through on our path to partnership. We have co-designed with our Black and minority ethnic partners a diversity module on our path to partnership. We ask questions about it when people are interviewed, and we don't just want a tick box yes. We want candidates for partnership to say, this is how I have integrated my commitment to leadership on diversity, inclusion and equality in my business plan. This is how, I am going to do this with my team. This is how it is going to be part of my personal brand. This is how it's going to be part of my client development. And I think also it's about having systems in place so that you can have things like mentoring, because you have to recognize, I think, the first thing to start, particularly I think with, I'm very conscious I'm a white woman talking about this, and I was lucky enough in to have a different set of experiences in the world, which were as a result of having white privilege. So until you understand the nature of what of privilege is, you can't really help amplify. You can't really reach out to people, so I think there's a lot about self-education and about listening, and that's where it begins with. Is that detailed enough?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thanks very much. Michael, same question. Can you point to something of which you're really proud and talk about how senior allies have played a part in that process?
Sure. So I think just to build on some of the matters that Helen was looking at too. I mean, one of the things I'm proud of in our firm is that we have become a more diverse and more inclusive place, and we've set ourselves some goals to drive ourselves to get to that, and we can talk about how we've used that separately. But we bring people in. So my role here is to say, well, look, it's our recruitment policy. When we're setting, what we expect from our intake, is that going to drive us to a place where we are a more diverse and inclusive workforce? So, and how do you do that in a global organization? That's quite hard. But you need to be very focused on making sure that the people you're bringing into the firm, represent, act and look like the people you want to be in your firm. Then how do you keep them? Okay, because they'll only stay if they feel that there's a path for them, that they feel that they truly belong. So how do you focus on retention of these people? So one of the other things we're looking at is actually how work is allocated. There are very traditional ways that work is allocated in a law firm. We all operate in little teams, and those teams are like self-generating, self-populating things. But how do you change those teams to be more diverse and more inclusive? So what work allocation methods can you put in? And then fundamentally, it's all about how people progress in your firm, across your entire firm. So how are you promoting people, not just the legal community, but also the business services community, to get leadership positions in your firm? So how do you do that? And again, along with with Helen's firm, we've got a path to partnership. We look very much at getting people through. Is it useful to have an idea that out of our population, so many people should be BAME, for instance, and driving behaviors that way. So I think at each level of your business's development, a senior ally can just question whether what you're doing is going to make you fundamentally a better firm. And in a big organization which has different cultural challenges across it, from the West Coast of the United States to Tokyo and everywhere in between, you need to make sure that is reflective of the markets in which you're operating. So it's a very challenging, it's kind of hard to get it done. But if you break it down into its component sections and each time analyze what you're doing to make a difference, I think you can make a difference. I wish we were making more progress and making it quicker. But I think we're making progress, and that's what I'm proud of.
Yeah, and what you're describing, I think someone talked earlier on about end to end, but it's kind of root and branch stuff, isn't it? It's yes. Everything in everything you do, everywhere you go. Sort of asking those questions about what might need to be different, what could make it better.
Yeah, and just to challenge, I heard somebody use the expression, every firm I'm sure has the head of the status quo. Okay, and it's just challenging that, because that's not, we want to be different. We want to be more diverse and more inclusive. So challenging the status quo is very important. Thanks
very much, Hamid. Always difficult to come last, but could you give me an instance, perhaps, of the same? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, the classic thing to get wrong in the new age, which is I'm still on mute. Sorry. I think a lot of the things that Helen and Michael have talked about, we are also doing that. So I'm not going to go through those things in a sense. Can I just pick up on one point before I give you a couple of examples of where we have taken some positive actions? I think what's really pleasing for me is, and look, I don't think I've experienced racism in the profession against me, and because I think you were talking earlier about tokenism point as well, but I don't know whether I have, and I think what I've been really pleased about in our firm, through the debate that's been going on certainly over the last year, through things like, Helen, you talked about your book club, we have our articles club, where people have an article that they go and discuss, and also the call that I talked about earlier, which was specifically pulled together after some incidents in America, but had over 1,000 people on the call. Right. What I've been really pleased about is the willingness of people who have never confronted racism, our white colleagues, to generalize, and I don't think it's fair just to say that, but, our white colleagues, in a sense, to open their thoughts to this, to understand what unconscious bias is. I always give an example that if a person from the BAME community goes into a room with 100 people and all of them are different to them, they probably think about the fact that they're slightly different. Maybe 50, 60 people in that room won't think of them in any other way other than they're a person. But there will be people who think. So there's an unconscious bias there. And I think we've confronted that. We're still continuing to confront, because this is a continuing process. And I think the examples that I can show are in our recruitment process, a lot of the things that Michael and Helen have talked about making sure that we create opportunities for the right people who have the academics, the intelligence, and intellect to work in our firm. Now, an example in the US would be we would recruit, as we do in the UK, or we recruit probably from a small number of universities, and we did so in the US as well. But there are in the US there are universities that were historically black universities, only taught black students because of segregation in the US. Now we've made a conscious effort to recruit from those universities, and there was a question earlier, I think, as well, about just making sure your catchment area takes into account people who maybe have not been given the opportunities previously and have gone to a certain university that you may not be looking at as your catchment university, but maybe opening up to them as well. So we're doing that. On business development pitches, I mean, for a number of years, major organisations who have asked firms to pitch for their work have had diversity and inclusion elements in it. And sometimes, I mean, go back 10 years or so, we would answer those in set fashion. Yes, we've got this number and that kind of thing. I think now there is much more thought given to how we answer that and how we give examples of how, we can demonstrate that we are an inclusive organisation. And there's a competitive advantage, because let's not lose that, why this is very important. There's a competitive advantage as well, that if you're not seen as an inclusive organisation, you have probably excluded yourself from acting for a substantial number of global organisations, multinationals, and also large UK companies. So there's a real reason for this, a business reason, and I think that's a driver as well.
Yeah, point very well made, in which we would do well to remember again, alongside the fact that we do this because we think it's the right thing to do. So both together weigh very heavily, don't they? I've had a question in about heads of diversity and inclusion. Someone is saying that there's been an absolute deluge of job ads for heads of diversity and inclusion, and the question is, and how does that play into or sit with the role of senior allies? And I just wondered if one of you might want to comment on that before I move to asking for some final remarks from each of you.
Well, I don't know, I could offer a suggestion. I think law firms are structured differently. So some law firms have a partner who is their head of diversity and inclusion, and some law firms have people who are they're not a partner, but they are in the business support role of rolling out a program. And my view is that ideally you need both, frankly. You need people like Hamid and Michael and me who are there, and we're partners in the firm and co-owners of the firm, if you put it a different way, and so you demonstrate that real commitment, and that it is, as someone else was saying, is part of your DNA as a firm. But then you also need help, probably from someone who has seen what good practice is in other sectors or across the legal sector, and who has a kind of network of diversity, inclusion contacts, and that can help actually run the implementation of the program. And what I would say is, for firms who might be listening in today and say, well, goodness me, we literally can't afford in these days to have someone else in business support. I would encourage you by saying that, for a long time at Trowers and Hamlins, we had a very active diversity, inclusion and equality programme, we didn't actually have anyone beyond our networks and our committee who ran it. It was co-designed, and it still is co-designed by people on the networks and from our communities. And the person who's our diversity officer sort of helps facilitate that, really. But I think, for a smaller firm who maybe doesn't have the budget to employ someone, I would say don't let that stop you. I think you will find, if you really know who works in your firm, you will find that there is an amazing richness of experience. And it might be that you have people who have distinct viewpoints or from distinct communities who you can bring forward, and they can facilitate things. They can give talks, they can do podcasts, they can write articles, or even they can just find things that are interesting to put on the internet, and they can help inform you in your business decisions. So I would say I don't think I do feel very, very strongly that nothing is hollower than a firm who just does this because they think it's a tick boxy thing. And if you're not actually engaging real people and speaking to real people and not being tokenistic and showing genuine interest and a genuine willingness and desire to engage with them and listen and to change the status quo, then forget it. You're not going to achieve a more diverse firm just by recruiting someone whose sole responsibility is to do diversity stuff and isn't engaged with the actual people in the firm.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks very much. I kind of take from that, whatever you can throw at it in a sense, but in a coordinated fashion is what you need. So my last question to each of you, and I'm going to ask you to do this in brief if you don't mind, is just to give you one at most two top tips. So some of the people who are listening are saying, yeah, but what do you do if the firm that you work for isn't really engaged? So could you give people one or two top tips for the first steps that they might take down this path? Hamid, can I start with you, please?
If a firm is not engaged, I see no reason why anyone in that firm cannot go to a leader in that firm and ask them why they're not engaged. And actually going to a leader in the firm and saying, why aren't you engaged, when there is such an important moral perspective, ethical perspective, and also business perspective to it as well. And maybe the way to go is to try and get some structured arguments as to why and reasons why it's a great thing for the firm to do. And that's I think of any firm of any size, I think not to be engaged in this initiative is a bad thing, for all of the reasons that I've talked about: moral, ethical. I mean, what else can I say? Business. I'm sure there's more objectives I've missed there. So they have to be engaged. I'm just trying to think of other examples of what they can do. Just sort of underlining, I don't think I can say it better than Helen did, but that part about inclusivity and a diversion officer only works in a firm if there is also buy-in from senior allies, going back right from the start, because you need to avoid that tokenism in a sense. If it's a tick box, it doesn't work. And Helen was much more articulate than I was, but I think without having that co-ownership, it doesn't work. And that co-ownership is so important. And the final point I'd make is actually there are so many brilliant initiatives going on within the professional services community and law firms in particular, be they small, be they medium, be they global. And there's some great lessons. We are on a journey. 10 years ago, I sat in a meeting where we had an unconscious bias lecture from someone, and they came out with 10 to 15 names of what you could call your female colleagues. And some of them, and there was laughter, you know, it wasn't taken seriously. I think in my firm, and I'm sure in Helen's and Michael's firm, if you had that lecture now and somebody didn't take that seriously, they would be frowned upon, not the other way around. And I think things have changed substantially. So I'll leave it there, Anna.
That's great. We're really out of time, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds, Michael, and I pass over.
Sorry,
you,
Michael.
I'm afraid, Helen. But
okay, 30 seconds. Okay.
Yeah.
Avoid the top down. So avoid creating a policy and just implementing it. I mean, I think you need to listen and build up, and don't be afraid by the enormity of the tasks from taking little steps, because actually little steps, it can be the beginning of something. So there you go, 30 seconds.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to call it a day because we promised people we'd finish at 1:30. I'm sure we could go on for considerably longer. It's been a great conversation. I want to thank you all for your contributions. I hope other people have found it interesting. I just want to end by saying that, you know, the SRA is very engaged with trying to make sure that you have the resources you need to be able to support you in the action you're taking. If you've got any bright ideas about other things we should do, please do let us know. But finally, just a word to the audience. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting. Please do feed back to us whether you did or not, and how we might improve these events going forward. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks for your time.